we are ready now to create our actual sign up form. So the first thing we need to do, let's add a couple of input fields, one for an email and then one for password. And then of course we need a button to submit our form to our backend authentication for AWS. I'm going to bring up my browser. All right, let's go to React Native, and then I'm going to go to Components. And what we're going to use for our input is the text input component. So for now, let's just copy paste this right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in a couple of times. And also, let's go ahead and make sure we import text input. And then instead of on change text, let's just, for now, we'll say console.log. And then console.log. And we'll set this in a little bit here. All right, so the text input component, we have a style prop. We have an on-change handler as the user inputs text, and then the value, this value is what's going to get displayed in here as we type. So if I type right now, nothing is being displayed. So bring up our terminal, and you'll notice as I type in letters, it'll output them here. Go back here. First thing we need to do is a way to manage the state for this component, and what we're going to use to do that is going to be a React hook called useState, and we're going to set that up for our component state. We'll just say state, set state, and then set that to use state, and then we'll have an email. Default we'll just set to an empty string, same with the password. A default will be empty string again. And then on our console.log, instead of console logging here, we're going to set state. Now here we're going to pass in two parameters. The first parameter we're going to use a spread operator for state, and then here this will be email, and then set that to whatever text was input. So if you're not familiar with how this works in React Native, it basically says maintain everything else in this object here. So we want to make sure we don't lose the value of our password, so that'll set password here, and then email will be reset to whatever the user is inputting as they input into this field. So let's go ahead and do the same thing here. I'm just going to copy that over, and then instead of email here, it'll be password. Oops. All right, so we have a way to set our state as the user types in, and then what we're going to set for the value will be state.email, and then state.password. So when we load, there's nothing here because our email and password, state.email and state.password is set to an empty string. But as I type in, this set state is being called, and it's setting this email to whatever is input. All right, so let me go ahead and delete these. So let's have an initial value set in here so the user knows what these fields are for. So there's two things we can do. First, we can add some text. So we'll use the text component, and we'll just say email and put it above that input field, and password, and let's see if we're importing text. We are, so that's okay. All right, we'll style this here in a little bit. The other way we can do this is we can add another property to this text input. Let me bring up my browser. So if we look at our text input on React Native, you'll see here are all the props that this component will take. And we are going to use this placeholder prop. So this is just, actually that's the text color. This is the string that's going to be rendered inside our input field. So let's go back here, and I'm going to set my placeholder equal to enter email. And then for this one, we'll say enter password. That way, even if I don't have a label, I know what that input field is for. It just looks a little bit nicer too. So let's bring up the browser again. Go to React Native, and for the button, I'm going to use this component called touchable opacity. It's just a nice little component that responds to touches on a device. So I'm going to copy these 3 lines right here, and I'll just put it after the last input. All right, let's see what we have. We have styles, we have an on press. Let's add a function call here and just console.log pressed button, just so we can see this is working. All right, there we go. And then, of course, we need to import touchable opacity. That's why I'm getting this error, can't find variable touchable opacity. So up here in our import, let's add touchable opacity, save that. And then, of course, here, this can't find variable styles. We are going to use an API called Style Sheet. And this is just an abstraction for our CSS styles. So let's open our browser and go to the React Native API just to see a little bit more documentation about style sheets here. It's just a way for us to move our CSS outside of our component. It just keeps our code cleaner and also makes it more reusable. So let's do that here. All right, so I'm going to go to the end of my file, and I will define a styles. Set that to style sheet dot create method, and then we pass it in some CSS. So we want a button, and for now we'll just do a background color, and we'll set that to blue. And then you'll notice the only difference between this and CSS is that the names are camel case instead of hyphenated. So in CSS this would be background hyphen color. It'll just be camel case in our style sheet component, or in our style sheet API. All right, so another cool thing, let's bring up our browser. I'm gonna go search for CSS colors, and here on W3 Schools, there's some really cool colors we can use. Like, I love this color. Let's try this one. I'm going to copy that over. I do know, I think the color names in React Native are going to be all lowercase. So there we go. So as you can see now, this is kind of a nicer color than that blue that we had in there. All right, let's add a little bit more styling, especially to these input fields, and make this button look a little nicer and align these a little bit better in this form. And then after we do that, we'll go ahead and work on our submit and submit our form to our backend. So we have text input. Instead of having these inline styles, I'm going to pull this out into the style sheet here. And this will just be called input. Okay. So this would be styles.input. So let's go back up here, do the same thing. I'm going to bring up the browser again, and we're going to go back to React Native, because we have something called dimensions. All right, so dimensions is a API that we can use to get the width of our device. That way, if I'm on a smaller phone versus a bigger phone, I can adjust this to be more dynamic and adjust to my device and not rely on some hard-coded value for the width of this input. This way it'll look more uniform across all devices. So let's do, so we're going to import dimensions from React Native, and then we're just going to copy paste window width. I'm just going to use width for now. I don't need height. So we're going to define that at the very top of our, outside of our component here, so that we can use it in our style sheet. All right, so we're going to do width, and we'll do window width. Let's do window width minus 20. So it's not the exact width, so we can play with this number and see what we like. Maybe minus 60. I think that looks better. All right, let's add a container to this and use Flexbox. So container, flex 1. And I'm just going to set the height to be 100% here. I need a comma. All right, so our container will be here at the top level. Style equals styles.container. It moved our form all the way up, so one thing we want to do is we want to justify everything in the center. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit of space between these fields and the button. So I'll add a margin bottom, let's try 20. All right, that looks a little bit better. And then the other thing I want to add here is a border radius, just to kind of round these corners, make them a little bit nicer. And then maybe even change this to a light gray. All right, let's go ahead and add some styling to our button as well. I'm going to add a height, and I'm going to try to match my input buttons and just do 40. Again, I'm going to do a border radius, and same as the buttons. Oops. All right, there we go. All right, so the other thing I want to do is I want to move this text to the center of my button, maybe change the color to white and all uppercase. So to do that, we have a text component, so we need to add a style to this thing here. So we'll just say style equal styles dot button text, we'll call it. And then we'll define our button text here. And let's do text transform, and I'll try uppercase, see how that looks. Color white. I need a comma. All right, so we have text transform uppercase and color white. That looks pretty good. And then I'll do a text align center. All right, so now let's go ahead and just kind of move this text down to the center. To do that, we're just going to go to our button. To do that, we're going to add justify content center to our button style. All right, I think that looks pretty good. The next thing we need to do is move these two links so that they're kind of lined up on each side of this button. So to do that, I'm going to wrap my buttons in a view container, and I will add a style and name that, let's say styles.links. Oops, we want to close this view down here. All right. So let's add our links style. And all right, so what I want to do in this link style is I'm going to change the direction of the flex container. The default usually is column, but we're going to set this to row because we want it to be displayed in a row. Like these are displayed as a column, like we have a flex here. Since we didn't define flex direction, it defaults to columns. So these two will be in their own flex container here. So this is a container here, and everything inside here, which would be two things. We have a button and a button, will be displayed as a row instead of a column. So we'll say row. So there we go. And then let's just kind of even that space out. And we can try, let's try, justify content, and then we can try space between. See how that looks. Perfect. So now we got that. Let's go ahead and change the color of these links. We'll say color, and I'm just going to set this to black. Actually, let's see what we did here. Okay, no, the color for the button is actually in the color prop within the component instead of the style. So we'll just do black, black. All right, I'm going to delete that. And then let's do a text. All right, so I think our form looks pretty good. Let's add a little bit more here. You see the enter emails right on the edge. Even when I typed on the edge of that input, let's add a little bit of padding inside our input. I think that'll look better. Let's do padding 10. Okay, that looks so much better. All right, now let's just kind of move the sign up to the center and maybe just move the labels a little bit. Sign in here. Style equal styles.title, and we'll define our title down here, and I'm just gonna text align center, and I'm gonna font size. Let's try 24 maybe. That's okay. And let's just, for fun, we'll do a text transform and see how uppercase looks. All right, I think that looks pretty good. Maybe this is a little bit too big, so we'll try 20. Still big. All right, I think that looks pretty good. All right, let's add some font weight. I'm gonna try 600. All right, there we go. I think that looks good. I'm just gonna move these over a little bit and we'll wrap up styling here in a minute. Let's do style equals styles.label. And same on this one, style equal styles.label, and then let's add our CSS label. I'm just going to add a margin to the left. Let's just do 5 maybe, and then maybe a little margin to the bottom as well. And I'll just do 5 again. All right, I think that looks pretty good. It's pretty decent. And you can play around with these. There's a lot you can do with how you want to design it. So just kind of a little bit of a cleanup here. Then I would recommend just kind of playing around with the styles and see what you prefer, the colors you prefer, etc. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, let's add some validation for our email and password. That way when you submit the form, it'll handle the error gracefully and do your validation before we submit it to the back end. Now the back end does some validation itself as well, but we want to do as much as we can on the front end and then let the back end handle the rest. All right, so to add validation, I'm going to bring up my browser, and you can go to this link here, gist.github.com techtuitive, and I'll put the link down in the bottom of the video as well. And there's a file there called validation. And just go ahead and copy this file. And I'm going to add this file under in my source directory. So in the source directory, new file, and call it validation.js. And just copy that contents of that file. So I'm not going to go over in detail how these work, but these are regular expressions to test and validate an email address, and then this one is to validate our password. It's just checking to make sure it's valid, and then here it's checking to make sure it's a specific length that has lowercase, uppercase, etc. This is from our settings in our Cognito AWS authentication setup. And then we'll use these later as we add to our form. For now, we just need these two functions right here. Validate email and validate password. So we're going to import these into our sign up form. So let's go ahead and import those. Import validate email and validate so to import that, I just import the function name and then up one directory to validation. Since we're inside the components directory, we need to go up one because it's relative to this, and then import that file. And the reason we put this in a separate file is we'll be reusing these. We're probably going to use this for the sign in, of course, and then we'll use this for the confirm password wherever there's an email. So it just makes this more reusable for us, so we don't have to use the same code in all our components. All right, the next thing we're going to do before we use this validation, we're going to create another state variable called errors, and then to set that, we'll call it set errors, and that will use state. And let's do email error and set that to an empty string initially, and then password error. And there we go. Actually, I don't need to name it. Let's just name it password and email because it's error.email. Okay, that's better. All right, so now what we're gonna define a function for our on press for our button, because that's where we're gonna be calling these before we submit the form, of course, and that's where we're gonna be submitting our form. So let's go ahead and do that. Function on submit. All right, so first thing we want to do is let's call our validation. So we'll say email error equals validate email, and we're going to pass it state.email, and then we'll do another one, const password error equal validate password, and we'll say state.password. Then we're gonna set errors and we'll set email to email error and password to password error. And then now that we've set those on submit, we can display the errors just underneath the field. So when you hit it, the error will be displayed right underneath that input field. So in here, I'm going to say text and then error dot email error. No, email. That's what we called it. We called it email. And then of course, if there's no email error, nothing's going to be displayed since that string is empty. And then password. And you notice it added a little bit of space since I'm rendering another component right underneath. So I might go ahead and adjust this margin bottom to maybe be 10. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and on press instead of, oops, this is not what I want to change. These are for my links. All right, that looks better. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want our onPress here to call our onSubmit function. OnSubmit. All right, let's go ahead and see what happens if I just press enter. So you notice I got my errors for both fields being displayed right underneath the form. So it kind of put things out of alignment. So let's go ahead and fix that. All right, so to fix that, I'm gonna adjust the width of the entire container here. And instead of adding width to these, instead of doing width here, we'll add some padding around it instead. So I'm gonna say width, window width. So it's the full width. And then I'm going to remove this and I'm going to add padding to the entire container. We'll say 20. There we go. So that looks a lot better. All right, let's adjust the style for our errors. We'll say style equal styles.error. Let's add it also to this one here. Style equals styles.error. And then I'm going to go down and error. Let's do color red. Oops, that should be in single quotes. Okay, that looks much better. And then let's do some bottom padding. Padding bottom. I'll do 10. All right, I'm going to adjust the padding or margin bottom here. I think the error should be a little bit closer. And then for my error, I'm going to add a little margin to the right, to the left, sorry. And we'll just do 5. There we go. I think that looks okay. So let's add okay, one more thing we forgot. So when I type in here, I want this to be transformed to lowercase since it's an email address. So let's do that. So here, we're going to call a JavaScript function called toLowercase. toLowercase. Yeah, here we go, toLowercase. All right, that should do it for us there. Oops. Okay, that's better. All right, let's see how that looks now. right, so no longer an error here because that was valid. All right, so that's looking good. All right, we have one last thing, and we're gonna go ahead and call the function to submit this form to our backend authenticator. All right, so let's bring up our AWS console. All right, so on your users and groups and your Cognito user pools, you can go check and see. For me, I don't have any users yet, so once we connect our backend API to submit this, we're gonna come back here and check and make sure that user was actually created. All right, so what do we need? We need to import a class called auth from AWS Amplify. So this auth class has all the methods we need to sign up, sign in, etc. Really simple. And then let's do this here. We'll say if email error or password error, if any of these is true, we're going to set the error. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and submit our form, and we'll say, let's set our user equal await to call an asynchronous function, await to call an asynchronous function, and that would be called auth.signup, right? And it takes a username, which in our case is an email, because that's how we set up our authentication to use our email as a username. That way our email was unique per sign up, and then password is password. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this in a try catch so we can see if there are any errors and catch those here. Catch error. And for now, we'll just console.log error. All right, so we call our authentication. If there's an error, we'll just display an error. And I know the error will have a message. So we'll just say, let's do actually an alert. Alert is just another React Native component. You notice it automatically imported because I have a plugin. Okay, we got an error, can't find. Of course it can't, because this should be state.email. All right, so let's go ahead and try that. Same with the password, of course. We'll do state.password. All right. Auth.signup is not a function, and I know why that error, because this is actually a lowercase. Obviously, it's a function. Okay, let's try it now. All right, I think that was successful. We didn't get an error. Let's check our, let's go ahead and bring up our console and see if that user was created. So let me see if I can refresh this. All right, so I have a user here, and it's the user that I just signed up for. All right, now that our form is working, we're handling errors. All right, so in the next video, we'll go ahead and reroute this to confirm code or confirm sign up. And we'll also do a little refactoring to this so that we can reuse a lot of this logic and the styles in our sign in, and also in our confirm code, our forgot password, etc. All right, see you in the next video.